everyone. In this video, we will conclude the creation of the short title sequence we started working on the previous video. Let's take a look to refresh our memories. So we had left it at where we had pushed the camera through and had set up the focal distance of the camera in order to create a good depth of field. Now, what we're going to be doing in this video is revealing the text through the smoky effect and trying to create that ambience, having the fog in the whole scene. To do this, we're going to use a couple of effects. And so let's get started. So the first thing is we need to morph and change the appearance of this title, October 31st Halloween, by using what we call a displacement map. Now, displacement map is a filter that uses the information, the black and white information of a layer to displace the information in another layer. Namely, we're going to apply the displacement map to this layer, and we're going to be using a black and white layer that will provide us with that information for the displacement map. To do so, we're going to be using a filter we had used in class, and that is fractal noise. So to do that, let me just go ahead and drop a copy of the solid we had created before for the background. You could create a brand new solid if you want to. And then I am going to apply to this particular solid the filter fractal noise. So by default, this gives me that wispy, webby looking effect. I want to change this into something that's a little bit more elastic, almost bulbous. And so for that, I'm going to switch from basic to dynamic. That automatically turns it into lava-looking smoke. And then I just need to animate it. Now, in the previous video, we had animated that we wanted the title to reveal between 3 and 4.5 seconds. So let me place my time marker at the 3-second mark, and I want to have this start moving at that point. I'm going to be moving it through evolution. So let me do a short preview of what that does. And you see that as I increase the evolution, basically the filter starts moving the black and white information as if it was magma, almost like boiling sugar. So that's what I want. Let me go ahead and set up a keyframe at 3 seconds. For evolution, let me go now to 4:15, and then I'm going to change the evolution to 1. So from this perspective, this is very similar to how we created that displacement map, that fractal noise mask for the Sedona project that we worked on together in class. So with that done, that information is what I'm going to use in order to create the displacement map in the title layer. However, the displacement map is going to be looking for black and white information. The information that we have that is black and white right now in the new layer, in the new solid layer, is not part of the layer. It is part of the filter. So as far as this composition is concerned, looking at that layer is looking at that red information in that solid. It's not looking at the black and white information that the filter has added to it. We need to pancake it. We need to just go ahead and make that part of the layer. And to do that, we need to create a precomposition, just like what we've done in class. So I'll select the layer, the solid with the fractal noise, and I'm going to precompose it. I will call this one displacement map for reference. And I'm going to move the filters, all the attributes into the new composition. So with that done, now that layer contains the black and white information. And as far as this composition is concerned now, it is looking at that black and white information from that layer. It's no longer looking at the red background from the solid. So with that in mind, all I need is just the black and white reference. I don't need anything else. So I can turn it off because I am going to be using a separate filter in the title layer. So in the title layer, I will be using that displacement map filter. So let me go to the filter window and filter out for displacement map. There it is, displacement map. And I'll drag the displacement map onto the title layer, let it go, and you'll notice that it automatically morphs or changes the shape of the actual artwork in that layer. And that is because it's looking for a displacement map layer here in the filter, and it's looking at itself. It's saying, oh, I'm using title. And that's the default. The program assigns the layer itself as the displacement map. So what I want to do is I want to change that from the title to the displacement map layer. And now it gets wavy. And the reason for that is because of the bulbous field, that magma field that we were looking at when the layer was being, when the filter was being animated, the magma look of the fractal noise. What I want to do is I want to make use of that light and dark values in that fractal noise information. So for that, I'm going to change for both the displacement, for horizontal and vertical displacements, I'm going to change both to luminance. And I want to increase the values significantly and then reduce them to 0. So let me go back to the 3-second mark, and I'm going to make a keyframe with a value of 50 for both vertical and horizontal displacements. Set keyframe, set keyframe. And then I'll go to the 4:15 mark, and at that point, my displacement should be 0. And so if I scrub through the composition, you'll notice that my title gets wavy and it almost looks like it's smoke-like, let's call it, like it's appearing as a ghostly apparition, basically. And from that, what I want to do now, what I want to do to sell the effect a little more is I want to add some blurriness to it that will also decrease. It will be very blurry when it starts, and it will be disappearing as it goes to 4 seconds. So let me go ahead and get to the 3-second mark again, go to my filters box and filter out for fast blur. Now fast blur is actually a deprecated filter, so now we use fast box blur, which is part of blur and sharpen, and we will add that fast box blur effect to it. I'll start with a radius blur of about 10, and I will create a keyframe for it, and at around 4 seconds I will make it 0. And so that basically creates that ghostly apparition, like smoke revealing through time, and then it'll just finish in the last 15 frames. It'll just come together. Now you could go all the way to 4:15 if you want to and change the position of those keyframes. So you can play around to see what gives you the best effect, whether you want the whole thing to be blurry all the way to the end, or if you want to make it a little bit, you know, sharper before then. It's completely up to you. It's depending on the aesthetic you're following. I find that legibility is important when it comes to titles, so I want to make things as sharp as possible when I'm applying effects to them so that people actually have the ability to read and not trying to dissect what's on the screen at any given time. Remember, the less you call attention to the filters, the better off your results will be. So with that in mind, let me just go ahead and close this, and that takes care of that. I also need to add kind of a short transparency set. So I want to go ahead and make it fade in, so to speak. So let's go to the 3-second mark and call the opacity value for that. And I want to make it appear in about 10 frames. So I'll go ahead and create 2 keyframes. One at the 3-second mark with a value of 100, and one at around 10 frames with a value of one with a value of 100 at 310, and one with a value of 0 at 3 seconds. So basically the title is just going to smoke in and fade in. You know, sort of do that smoky transition and come into plain view at 4:15. And so now it's legible. Now, we can go ahead and finesse all this by applying easy ease into all the keyframes so that our transitions and all of the motion that we are creating is not as linear. So let's go ahead and make them all easy ease in or easy ease out. And you can go ahead and fine tune all of these keyframes as any other keyframes are available within your graphing editor. So you can go ahead and fine tune if you need to. With that done, that basically takes care of that portion of the composition. And I have my camera with the depth of field applied, and then my title starts smoking in at around 3 seconds and it appears. All that is left now is the fog. So now, typically speaking, in a regular After Effects workflow, you would rely on, there is a huge array of third-party filters that are being sold out there by Trapcode, by, you know, there's many companies that actually make filters specific for motion graphics. And these filters are becoming a lot more popular. They're becoming a lot more available. However, most of them, the real good ones, remain quite expensive. So you're talking about $300, $400 per filter. So if you have cash to buy that kind of thing, then you're good. But most of us don't. So what we want to do is we want to leverage the tools that we have with the default set in After Effects to actually create fairly convincing looking compositions. And for that, what we're going to do is basically reuse the same filter that we were using a second ago, the fractal noise. So to do that, what I want to do is I want to move back to the very beginning of the composition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack several layers in the composition at different distances from the camera. And to those, I will be applying different sets of fractal noise so that they give me that sensation as my camera flows through the composition that there is fog everywhere. The trick to doing this is to be able to combine those layers appropriately so that you give that sensation of walking through fog. That means you need to be able to combine numbers and the crossfades between the different layers. So let's take a look at how we're going to do that. Let me go ahead and go to my project window and drag one of the solids onto the screen, onto the composition, sorry, and make it a 3D layer. And I want to place that solid at around, let me call its position. I'm going to place it right next to 3.1, which was at around 500 pixels. So I'll place that solid at around 500 pixels. And I'm going to apply just the default fractal noise. Just literally going to grab the fractal noise and just apply it as is. Then I'm going to change the mode on that fractal noise just to keep the white values and dump the black values. So I'm going to go ahead and, or dark values, I'm going to change it to add. Actually, I could change it to screen. So it's a little bit more muted. And I want to change its opacity to about 50%. And I obviously want to increase the size of my layer. And so that gives me that wavy feeling, which is not very, realistic. But if I make it move through time, then things might change a bit. So let me go ahead and create a keyframe for evolution with a value of 0 at the very beginning. And then go all the way to, say, 6 seconds, 6:15, which is the length of the composition that we were working with, 6:15, and I'm going to make that one rotation at that point. And now this is going to move ever so slowly as we move through the composition. Let me reduce the quality of my composition so that this renders a little faster and push through. Now that still looks like a web. So what I want to do is probably increase the size of that smoke. I want to make the scale 200 until it makes it ever a little bit bigger, and maybe reduce the complexity from 6 to about 3. It's going to make things a little bit blurry. Now, the key here is that when you are working with fog, you seldom pay attention to the details in the fog. Fog doesn't look very detailed. So you have that to your advantage. You want to make sure that you keep that in mind. You also might want to work with the opacity a little bit more. Let me bring that down to about 150. And I increase my complexity to 5 again. Let's see if that works a little bit better. So now, as I walk through this, as I walk through the composition and I push through the smoke, that's a flat layer. Basically, the layer is not really, the smoke, the fog is not really moving in 3D. And at some point, my camera is going to go right through that layer, which happens around here. Watch. At this point, the smoke is I'm going to go through the smoke. And that's because my lens got to the point where that layer was, which is 500. Now, I can go ahead and sell this better if I, instead of having this layer at 500, which is where I originally had put it, I make it, let's place it at 0, for example. Now, I brought the smoke towards me. Now, when I move, now it looks like I am inside the smoke. And with that ever so slightly motion given to us by the evolution filter, you're going to get an effect that sells a little bit better. It almost looks like you're walking through 3D smoke. What I want to do is, you might want to increase the evolution speed if you want to, but now it's a matter of fine-tuning the filter. Now, what I want to do at this point is now that layer, the smoke layer, the fog layer, let's call that. Let's actually rename it fog. Okay, now that fog one is at 500 at 0. Sorry, at a z value of 0. So my camera is going to pass it around here at around 2 seconds, a little past 2 seconds. So what I want to do is at that point I want to make a copy of the fog. In that second fog I am going to place, let's say at I know my camera stops at 500, so let me place it at around 750, let's say. Okay. Now you'll notice that it's obviously smaller than the composition window, so I need to scale it up to cover the entire composition, and you'll notice how everything got a lot brighter. And what I want to do is I want to maintain the opacity of this layer non-existent until my camera passes the first layer, which is around here. So around between 115 and 2 seconds, or between 115 and 203, there's going to be a crossfade between the first fog and the second fog. So what I'm going to do is on the first fog, I am going to create an opacity value of 0 at 203 right here. Let me go ahead and change the opacity value to 0. And I am going to start doing the crossfade at around 115. Let's say 115-ish. Yeah, let's do 115. Probably 120. So I'm giving myself about 15 frames of crossfade. So that layer is going to start disappearing, as you can see. And the other one should start appearing at that point. So at 120, I am going to create keyframes for that one that allow me to create that crossfade feel. So that crossfade makes it look like you almost went through the smoke at that time, or through the fog, sorry, and now you're looking past that fog, and the combination of all the elements of the things coming out of in and out of focus due to the enable depth of field, and the layers appearing or disappearing and disappearing, and the slow fog changes. Let me trim this layer here. I don't need that much layer. And same thing with this one. Let me go ahead and bring it back up here. So that the combination of those things creates that sensation of walking through the fog without the need to pay for an expensive, filter. Now you'll notice that because my camera is so close to that fog, to the last fog, it looks pretty burnt or pretty white, pretty screened. So you can do a number of things with this. You can go ahead and push that second fog even further if you want to. So let's say I place it at 1250. Now it's going to make it really smoky. Now it's going to look a little bit wispier. But when I pull back over here, I'm going to have that gap. And so I might have to add another layer in between those two to compensate for that space where I don't have any fog. And that's just as simple as making another copy. So if I wanted to, let's go ahead and actually let me push that to 1500. And let me make a copy of that one. Let me actually push this back to 510, which is where I had it before. And let me make a copy of let me place it at 490 so that my lens passes it. So at some point, my lens is going to pass that second fog as well. Boom. And so I want to have some fog right next to the title as well. So I'll go ahead and make a copy of that fog too, and push it all the way to about, let's say 1500, and do the same thing I was doing before. So at some point when my camera passes that second fog layer, which is around here, right here, then that layer should be fading out at that point, which is these two keyframes. I'm gonna borrow those keyframes there. I'm gonna scrub them up, and then this one has fade in filters because it was a copy of that same layer, so it already had those two keyframes, and I have a crossfade between those two layers. So I can go ahead and maintain it. Now it's a matter of positioning this particular layer, the fog 3. So if I go ahead and make that, let's say 1250, I bring it towards the camera, and so on. So you create the sensation of walking through fog without the need of having all those particles or having the filter. Now, if you want to, if there are things that you don't like, it's basically a fine-tuning the positioning of different items. So let's say if I want to push this now to 510, the second one. Let's see if that takes care of the sharpness on this. Not sharpness, but the full opacity of it, as you can see it. Maybe I want to make it less. What is the value of that one? So let's say 510. And oh, I see it. This is right next to my camera. That's why that tree is probably tree 2, which happens to be around 500 or 1,000. Sorry. So I'm seeing that. So maybe I want to bring that, instead of having it at 1250, and maybe I want to bring it to 990, and that will cover that tree. Now, like I said, now it's a matter of working with opacity and a combination of elements to have more or less visibility or legibility within the screen. I still want to have some of the fog, so I will still want to see that texturing moving around, but I want legibility. So this is basically the end result. And then last but not least, we would be adding the music. So let me import the file, which is missing at the moment, I guess. Where do I have that sound? Just go ahead and bring in the actual final file. And I'm just going to use the sound from that file. So there it is. I'll just place it at the very top, turn off its visibility, and that completes the short title sequence.